Okay, all right. Title of my talk is Astronauts, Explorers, or Guinea Pigs? Discussion of the proper ethical basis for a human spaceflight program. And this is a rather sensitive topic that I'm going to bring up, but I think it's overdue that this be discussed. But I will begin by telling a little bit of history. There's a wonderful book that I recommend to everyone called Scientists Against Time. It was written by J. Baxter Finney, won the Pulitzer Prize in 1947. And what this book is it's a history of the American scientific war effort in World War II, which, by the way, was incredible. Okay, I mean, we all know the story of the atomic bomb, and perhaps some of you know the story of radar, but the American scientific war effort in World War II encompassed a huge number of areas: penicillin, DDT, anti-submarine warfare, proximity fuses, all sorts of things. It totally outclassed the German scientific war effort, and the other allies, and the Japanese were a joke compared to it. And one, however, of the stories that he tells in this book is the story of dealing with hypoxia. Okay, that is, early in the war, the bombers are flying up there above 20,000 feet, and pilots are blacking out, and the planes just start falling out of the sky, even though the enemy isn't even around. Okay, and the general's very upset about this, and this was viewed as a medical problem. So they went to the doctors, and they say, "Doctor, we have this problem. The pilots are blacking out, falling out of the sky." The doctor said, this is a very interesting medical problem. How can we develop a treatment, perhaps a pill for hypoxia, that will allow the pilots to get by with less oxygen? And this is a very interesting, we should have a research project on this. And the engineers came in and says, no. What you need is an oxygen mask, and you have a compressed oxygen tank, and you put the mask on, and even though you're up there where the atmospheric pressure is less than half that of sea level, since you're breathing pure oxygen, you actually have much more oxygen that you're breathing than you are right now in this room. Everything will be fine. And the doctors say, get these mechanics out of here. Okay, this is a medical problem. This is a medical discussion. These people do not have medical degrees. They do not know what they're talking about. This is ridiculous. It's a mechanical system. It could fail. What if a bullet were to hit the oxygen tank and all this oxygen gets around? The plane could catch fire. There's extra weight involved. Mechanical systems fail. Blah blah blah. Okay, what you need is a cure for hypoxia. And for about the first 6 months of this discussion, the doctors prevailed. They had the status, they came from a superior social class to the engineers, and so forth. But of course, they did not find a medical cure for hypoxia. Okay, and at a certain point, the generals got fed up, and they threw the doctors out, and they said, "Hey, you with the oxygen tank, get in here." And they gave them oxygen masks, and everything was fine. And later on, towards the end of the war, we even had pressurized cockpits that had, everything. But so there it was. And the thing there, is that wartime conditions provided a driving force to get rid of bullshit. Okay, it should be obvious in retrospect, if not beforehand, that it's much easier to solve a simple engineering problem than it is to try to change human physiology. Okay. Now, fast forward to zero gravity. Okay. When the space program began, we had to know how to cope with zero gravity. It was a totally novel condition, and we had to could people eat in zero gravity? We discovered that people would get a kind of a space sickness, but how do you overcome that in terms of short duration adaptation to zero gravity? And that was done, and the astronauts are able to pilot their spaceships to the moon and so forth, and that was fine. So you created a zero gravity research community which was addressed to basically the problems associated with the Apollo program. Now, Subsequently, we had Skylab, and we were able to start looking at the long duration effects of zero gravity, which became very clear, involved a deconditioning, loss of bone, loss of muscle, the damage to the cardiovascular system, and so forth. And the Russians obviously had similar results from their Salyut space station program. But so you had this research community formed and around this. Now, as early as the 60s, people were aware that rotating the spacecraft, creating artificial gravity, was a way to avoid the zero gravity situation altogether. But it wasn't really necessary for Apollo. You were only in space 3 days out and 3 days back. And it was a more complication than it was worth. But later on, as early as, well, in the 60s, there's a little bit of research on artificial gravity from NASA, looking at how fast a rotation rate you could have without creating Coriolis effects and things that would cause disorientation. And they discovered you could go up to 6 RPM. And that was done. But then it was all dropped when the Mars mission was dropped. But in the 80s, this community was still around, and the shuttle missions are going for a couple of weeks, and later on they're going to Mir, and then eventually to the space station. We're going to research zero gravity and go to conferences where Russians are presenting their results, and they're trying to use exercise machines and penguin suits and stuff and various drugs with very marginal, certain things they could avoid, certain kinds of sheer muscular deconditioning if you exercised furiously on the machines, but other kinds of deconditioning could not be avoided. And then they were designing the space station and designing it as a zero gravity facility. And in fact, I was at one conference in the early 80s, and it was actually about the mid 80s, after the space station program had just begun. And I confronted a NASA official, and I said, the zero gravity causes all these health effects. Why don't you make it an artificial gravity space station? As, for instance, von Braun, way back, had proposed. And they said, no, we need zero gravity research, because when we go to Mars, it's going to be in zero gravity. I said, well, why don't we rotate the Mars spacecraft? He says, no, we don't want to do that, because all of our data from the space station is going to be in zero gravity. Every once in a while, somebody in NASA, typically from someplace like Ames, which is sort of one of the wild card NASA centers as far as thinking is concerned, says, well, we ought to have a satellite which we spin and have animals in it and look at artificial gravity. And the program would go a certain distance and then get shot down out of headquarters. They didn't want any of this. They just didn't want it. Or us with our TransLife mission. Some interest among the Mavericks, but in terms of the mainstream, no, we don't want this. And in fact, this similar condition prevailed in the Soviet Union, where you had an entrenched community devoted to zero gravity health effects research. In the entire history of both the US and the Soviet space programs, there has only been one artificial gravity experiment done, which was a Soviet experiment in 1977. They took a bunch of mice and they spun them up at 1G. And that was actually only to have a control against the real experiment, which was the 0G experiment. So here we are. We have a space station program. Okay, and people are being sent to it on a series of 6-month rotations. And what science is being done at the space station? The primary science being done at the space station is studying the health effects of 0G on the astronauts. Okay, any other science is extremely obscure that they might be doing. In fact, I'm pretty much unacquainted with any scientific results of any substance that have been outside of this. There's been plenty of this sort of thing. So what you really have here is a program of human experimentation. okay, being done on essentially involuntary subjects. There are ethical rules in the medical community controlling medical research, okay, and, I'll read you a few. The World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki Statement of Ethical Principles for Medical Research Involving Human Subjects. Special attention is also required for those who cannot give or refuse consent for themselves, for those who may be subject to giving consent under duress, for those who will not benefit personally from the research. It further states that the subject should be informed of the right to abstain from participation in the study or withdraw consent to participate at any time without reprisal. All of which conditions are untrue for the astronauts. Okay, if they don't play ball, they don't fly. So we're flying astronauts in space. We are damaging their health in various ways to acquire data. Okay. Now, and while avoiding research on the engineering solution that would eliminate this unhealthy condition that we are subjecting them to. Okay? And to me, there's a problem with this. There's a serious problem with this. And it degrades astronauts from explorers to guinea pigs. Part of this is also a function of the fact that you have a space program which is not actually going anywhere. So, it's kind of as if, Henry the Navigator, the person who initiated the great European age of maritime exploration, instead of sending his ships to go further and further down Africa and each one to try to go further than the one before, he had just sent his ships 100 miles offshore and parked them there and to take observations of how long it took sailors to get scurvy and other health effects of being on these small ships for extended duration, seasickness and unclean conditions and what have you. It is one thing to subject people to hazard in order to accomplish a mission. Okay? A lot of Henry's sailors who went on these missions did not make it back, either because of scurvy or shipwreck or natives or what have you. But still, they were out there to accomplish a mission. You send military personnel on a mission, and some may get killed doing it, but they're doing a mission. You don't take them, and it's one thing, okay, if a soldier is wounded, and in the process of treating him, you study the behavior of wounds and get data on which treatments work the best, that's entirely legitimate. But to wound people for the purpose of getting data, okay, is an entirely different matter. And to tell people, for instance, that it's a condition of promotion that they allow themselves to be wounded in order that we can study the effects, or a condition on not being court-martialed, or being, allowed to be a pilot or whatever it is that they want to be. So I think this is a problem. I think that the issue of researching artificial gravity is, at this point, not merely something smart to do, but it is a form of ethical negligence. To say, we're just going to continue to subject people to effects that are well documented to be unhealthy, and which, there have been 130 or so shuttle launches and another 30 or so Apollo, Gemini, Mercury flights before that, and it's 150, and comparable number of flights from Russia, but 300 flights to orbit. And except for the first few, most of them stayed, a week or more in zero gravity, and these health effects are very well documented. We don't need